Goldman Sachs has triggered a furious reaction by buying up bonds issued by an arm of Venezuela's government. Demonstrators took their protest to the investment bank headquarters in New York. Critics say by buying the bonds, Goldman is supporting President Nicolas Maduro, even as his government drives people to hunger and desperation. I'm joined by our Patrick Gillespie, who's been looking into this. You know, Patrick, I saw this. Goldman Sachs knows it has this reputation as a profiteering vampire squid. What are they up to here?
You know, Goldman says, when I spoke to them, they say, we believe we are betting on Venezuela's future getting better, and they say we're not alone. There are other banks, Bank of America, Citi, some mutual funds like Fidelity and T. Rowe Price. They have Venezuelan bonds in their indexes that millions of Americans invest in. So they're saying we're not different from the rest, and we believe things will eventually get better in Venezuela.
Right, sort of business as usual. But we've been watching what's been playing out, you know, the increasing desperation, the government unraveling. I mean, it would seem like even if you buy their explanation that this is a very risky investment to make.
It is a very dire situation in Venezuela, but from a purely financial perspective, Maggie, this is a win-win for Goldman. They either get hefty returns up front at a major discounted price, or President Maduro, who has prioritized paying bondholders instead of bringing in food for citizens, he steps down, he's removed from power, and then, you know, the price of the value of the bonds goes up. So it's, you know, either a long-term win or a short-term gain.
Win-win. We've never heard that scenario from Goldman before. Explain to me too. Everyone, we're sort of saying they're investing. You know, critics are saying he's propping up Maduro by giving them this money. What exactly did they buy, though? It's the oil company bonds.
They were buying bonds from Venezuela's state-run oil company, PDVSA. It's important to note, you know, Venezuela, the only source of money the country has is oil. So this is really government money that they were buying. And what we saw right after the bonds were purchased by Goldman, what happened? Venezuela's government reserves went up. So it does seem as if the government benefited from this bond purchase.
Right. So it's not a traditional government bond, but because of the heavy ownership of the oil company, it sort of feeds right into the coffers.
Exactly.
All right, Patrick, thank you so much for explaining to us what exactly is happening. Let's get some reaction and discuss this with our guest. Ricardo Hausmann is director of Harvard's Center for International Development. He was also a government minister in Venezuela in the early 1990s. Thank you so much for being with us, Ricardo. I just want to get your, you know, Goldman Sachs said, listen, we have these bonds, so do a lot of other emerging market investors. They're out there in the marketplace. We bought them in the secondary market. What is your reaction? Is that a good enough explanation?
That's a really lousy explanation, morally indefensible explanation. They bought those bonds from the Central Bank of Venezuela with an intermediary that was sanctioned for not having enough capital, a minimum capital requirement of $250,000. This was an operation where they bought $2.8 billion in bonds for $865 million. That means that $865 million went straight to the coffers of the Central Bank of Venezuela at a yield to Goldman of 48%. That means that the Venezuelan government was borrowing at a 48% per year interest rate. We know that this is like cocaine bonds. This is money today. There is no investment in Venezuela that yields 48%. It can only be paid with hunger tomorrow. So all the other bonds in Venezuela have been issued and have been in the market for a long time. This bond that they bought was not circulating. It was in the hands of the Central Bank of Venezuela. It was never issued internationally. This is the first time it hits the international markets. There was no secondary market operation.
Right.
And this is
Ricardo,
straight money that went into
you.
Venezuela.
And you are expressing the frustration we saw outside the street and in many circles. I can imagine that if we, you know, ask them again, any investment banker will say, listen, we operate, you know, if they're going to be you know, discrimination against any government, it's for the governments to put sanctions on other governments. It's not for investment banks to make these moral decisions about who we should be investing in and who we shouldn't. And if they have no money flowing, it will also hurt them. Should the U.S. have front-run this and right out set up a situation where there are sanctions? Should the international community, from a governmental level, be doing more?
Well, look, Goldman Sachs has been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for 2 days in a row because of this operation. The outrage is in the market, in market participants, in institutional investors, in individual investors. This is not what you expect Goldman Sachs to be doing, propping up a government that... this is not what people want to happen to their money. So financial institutions will be forced to communicate to people investing in emerging market funds that they don't hold Venezuela because Venezuela is issuing hunger bonds. These bonds that Venezuela is issuing are only paid with a reduction in living standards in Venezuela. They're irresponsibly issued at interest rates that no one can ever pay. But this government has insisted on paying by cutting down imports of food, medicine, and creating the most calamitous collapse in economic activity ever seen in this hemisphere ever.
Ricardo, as we've been watching, and we just had our Nick Payton-Walsh come back from reporting on the ground there, which is difficult to do these days. What is your feeling? What are you hearing from people there? How much longer can the situation be sustained for average Venezuelans?
Well, the situation in Venezuela was disastrous last year. It was the biggest single decline in a year. It's been a recession for the last 3 years, and this year it's getting significantly worse. There's news that food companies are shutting down because they don't have enough raw materials to process. The total supply of food is coming down. The total supply of medicine is collapsing. The situation in the country could not be more dire. So this was an injection of oxygen to this government that has not had access to Wall Street in a long time at ridiculous interest rates. You know, the U.S. went through all these scandals about subprime mortgages and with teaser loans and stuff like that. Well, this is exactly the kind of situation that Goldman Sachs has been abetting.
And why there is the criticism that we are hearing today. Ricardo Hausmann, thank you so much for joining us.